There are about 48 million people living in the US in rural communities. That's about 15% of our population. And a big issue is tech and how to make sure they get access to all the tech innovation that's happening, access to good jobs, access to economic growth. Joining me to talk about it is Matt Dunne. He's the founder and executive director of Center on Rural Innovation. Matt, good to see you again.
Good to see you as well.
And it's good to see you here at CES. You talk about this. This is like your whole goal at Corey is innovation, tech innovation, and how to get it into the hands of the people who need it. Tell me what you guys have been up to.
Exactly. So we've been working with communities across the country. We focus on micropolitan areas, which are those places that are bigger than a bread box of a real downtown, but are truly rural in nature. And we help them to be able to both get those kinds of technology jobs that pay good wages and are more future-proof, but also to be able to start innovation-based companies so they can grow wealth in their community that they love.
And how are you doing that? Are you connecting them with the money itself? Are you connecting them with ideas? How are you making it happen?
Yeah, the biggest challenge for rural founders and aspiring rural technologists is isolation. It's really nothing else. It's not their capacity, their tenacity, or even their innovative ideas. It's being able to connect them to the advisors that can give them the information that they need to be able to be successful that you might find in a Palo Alto or a Cambridge, Massachusetts, or someplace like that. And then also the capital, so that they can either get the training that they need to be on the forefront of technology, whether they're working remotely or for the local hospital, or in starting their own innovation-based company. Because venture capital is hard to come by when you don't already have an ecosystem that can support those kinds of innovation-based ideas and bring them to market. So we've been working with communities now for almost 8 years, helping them to create both the strategy to leverage the assets they have, but also to secure the funding, usually through Federal Economic Development Administration dollars, to be able to stand up tech talent development programs, tech accelerators, and then the places and spaces to create density and bring people together as a tech community.
Can you give me an example of one of these communities and how what you have done and making that connection has made a difference for people?
Sure. I'll take Portsmouth, Ohio. It's in the southern, very southern part of Ohio in Appalachia. They have struggled for really the last 40 years and most recently at being the center of the opioid epidemic. But incredible leadership that's there helped bring world-class broadband and then allowed for a university like Shawnee State to really zero in on game development and game development entrepreneurship as a core area. They went ahead and built an innovation center right on the border of the downtown and the university to pull in both sides of that community to be able to work together. They then were able to receive not only funding to help with tech talent development, particularly from folks who had been in a non-traditional education pathway, but also to start an accelerator program itself that's now attracting folks to come down from Columbus to get their ideas to market. And we're seeing that then have lots of other ripple effects. Folks who are coming home and grew up there have been successful in Silicon Valley and are now bringing their companies and their capacity back to Portsmouth. And most recently, they were awarded a $35 million riverfront redevelopment grant, which is going to allow them to transform their place that's building on the momentum that's coming with their innovation investments. So that's an example right in the heart of Middle America.
And once you do that and maybe bring these entrepreneurs in and their ideas and their home base, they're homegrown there, how are you making sure you have a workforce for those folks?
So you got to do the two things at the same time. If you just do the workforce side, people move. And if you just do the entrepreneurship side, they don't have the talent to be able to build from there. So we really work with communities on those parallel tracks so that they can have the talent pool pipeline, again, from folks who are either coming out of a university system or people who've had a non-traditional pathway to education and are looking for a career change. And we've seen with lots and lots of efforts in cities where you can do that reskilling into technology jobs like cybersecurity, IT specialists, full stack developers, and be able to then bring that same kind of approach to these smaller markets. So we have a whole team that does that, works with employers as well as education institutions like community colleges that may not have that expertise themselves, but are then able to partner with online programming so they can bring all those pieces together.
And a key to a lot of this too is broadband.
Absolutely.
And if you don't have broadband, you cannot apply for a lot of jobs, you cannot get some of that training. So how are you working to bring broadband to those communities?
Well, I mean, that's the table stakes, right? If you're going to make the case that you can have technology jobs or even a strong remote workforce with those higher quality earning potential, you've got to have the connectivity. The good news is that the last administration and the bipartisan infrastructure bill brought enough money that we can bring high-speed internet to every American. The trick is now implementing that. So we have a whole team that works with communities that are looking to leverage the BEAD funding and other kinds of resources to make sure that they're getting future-proof fiber to the home connectivity and that it's affordable to make sure that everyone has the potential to access and leverage that platform for success, whether it's on their career trajectory or starting a company that can transform a marketplace.
Yeah. And I mentioned earlier that 48 million Americans are in rural communities.
Yep.
About 10 million of those are people of color. And I think a lot of people have the idea that it's only like white Americans who live there. Is there another challenge, an extra challenge for those people of color getting connected to that funding?
There are lots of misconceptions about rural America. One of the biggest ones that we are fighting is to make sure people know that rural America is not white America, that it's incredibly diverse. And if we're leaving out those individuals of color who are in rural America as we're trying to create greater equity, we're making a big mistake and we'll just never get there. So we really zero in on making sure that we're inclusive in the outreach that we do, as well as going to places that have higher diverse rural populations. In the Southeast, working in places like Wilson, North Carolina, or Pine Bluff, Arkansas, but also in the Southwest, where there are emerging Hispanic majorities. And we've started to collaborate with tribal communities as well, with the Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma, as well as tribal communities in Michigan. So we think that there is a real opportunity to do that outreach. The barriers are multitude. I mean, you start with people somehow believing if you live in a rural place you can't code, which isn't the case, right? But there became this view that you had to live in a city if you were going to work in tech, and then all the inherent biases about individuals of color being able to participate in those economies, which also are not true, but you need to be proactive in making sure that folks both are doing that outreach, but also folks in that community understand that these are jobs for them, and that this can be something that is a career path. Because unfortunately, when you have issues of systemic racism and other things, you start to internalize it and feel like that's maybe not my pathway. So we make proactive efforts and we work with our communities to learn best practices for doing that outreach and making sure that we have examples and models of folks who have succeeded from those communities.
And kind of to wrap things up too, a lot of employers are saying they can't find skilled workforce. Looking in a rural community is probably a good idea. What's at stake if you don't bring in that rural community into our economy?
Well, I mean, there's a few things at stake. One is you're missing out on a whole bunch of really amazing perspectives. Because if you live in a rural place, I would argue there's a certain grit that you have because you're having to wear all the hats and figure out things on a regular basis, and that's just a unique perspective that you could bring to your company and to taking on the challenges that you have as you're trying to build an organization or a company using technology. But the bigger risk as a nation is that we become more divided. And we have seen since the Great Recession an unbelievable division emerge economically between rural and urban places, one that was unprecedented. And it was all about the winners and losers of the tech economy. And that then starts to tug at the fabric of our nation in all kinds of ways. So I believe it's an imperative both in our national competitiveness to be able to make sure that we're bringing all voices and minds to the table, particularly folks in rural communities, but it's also important for our nation to be able to come back together and be the nation that we all hope it will be.
Thank you, Matt.
You bet. Thank you for
Good to see you
interviewing.
again.
You bet.